The church was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels wrong when someone you love is gone. Henry Rose, 68, stood beside the casket of his wife Elise, the woman he'd loved for nearly 5 decades. He wasn't a man of many words, but today, his silence held more meaning than any eulogy. People filed past, offered polite condolences, whispered clichés. She's in a better place. You were lucky to have her. She had such grace. He nodded, thanked them, barely heard a word. But then came Melissa, his daughter-in-law. She entered the church wearing a bright red dress, the kind of red you wear to a cocktail party, not to a funeral. She walked in holding the arm of Henry's son, Travis, smiling faintly like she was at a luncheon, not a farewell. As they slid into the pew behind Henry, he heard Melissa lean over and whisper, with a slight laugh, "Today feels like a celebration." Henry didn't turn around, didn't flinch. But his hand gripped the side of the pew just a little tighter. Later, at the family home, people gathered for the post-funeral reception. Trays of food. Soft piano music. Distant small talk. Melissa laughed loudly from the corner, wine glass in hand, speaking to distant relatives. "She left behind quite a bit, huh?" she said. "Guess it's a good thing we stayed close." Henry stood in the kitchen doorway, watching her. She never even looked at the framed portrait of Elise. When everyone left that evening, Henry walked upstairs alone. The house was too quiet now, painfully so. He opened Elise's drawer, reached inside, and pulled out a sealed envelope. Her handwriting. Neat. Strong. Confident. To be opened with the will. He held it for a long moment. Then, gently, placed it inside his coat pocket. Tomorrow, everything would change. The lawyer's office was quiet, too formal, too cold. Melissa sat confidently in a cream-colored blazer, one leg crossed over the other, manicured fingers tapping impatiently on her phone. Travis, her husband and Henry's only son, looked slightly less sure, but still wore that practiced polite smile. Henry sat across from them, silent. At the far end of the long wooden table sat Mr. Caldwell, Elisa's longtime estate attorney. Beside him, a thick file and a sealed envelope. Melissa leaned forward, whispering to Travis, "You think we'll get the lake house too? I always hated that tacky jewelry box, but the rest should be worth a fortune." Travis didn't reply. Caldwell cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, Mrs. Elise Rose prepared her will very carefully. She also left a final letter to be read aloud, at her request." He opened the envelope. Henry watched without blinking. Caldwell began reading. "To my beloved husband Henry, you have always been my heart. I trust you will honor what I've written here, because I know your quiet strength will hold up even when others try to take more than their due." Melissa rolled her eyes. "Can we skip the poetry and get to the inheritance?" she muttered under her breath. Caldwell paused, then continued, now reading the section everyone was waiting for. "To my son Travis and his wife Melissa." Melissa straightened in her seat. "You will receive my sincere hope that you live lives of character and humility. You will not receive ownership of our home, our savings, or our business assets. Instead, all primary estate assets will be placed in the care of the only person who stood beside me until the end, Grace Dalton, my caretaker." Melissa froze. "What?" Travis sat up. This isn't right." Caldwell calmly continued. "Mrs. Rose made a legally binding trust 6 months before her passing, transferring control of all financial and physical assets to Ms. Dalton. It is watertight." Melissa's voice cracked. "You mean, we get nothing?" Caldwell looked at Henry, then back at Melissa. "You get a reminder that Elise saw more kindness in a stranger than in her own family." Melissa stood so fast her chair fell backwards. Her eyes filled with rage, and something else. Fear. She was manipulated. "This isn't real. This has to be a joke." Then her face crumpled. And for the first time that day, she cried. Melissa had stormed out. Travis lingered behind, pale and shaken, as if unsure whether to chase her, or disappear himself. Henry remained seated, still silent, still watching. Mr. Caldwell closed the will and folded his hands. "There's one more thing," he said. "Elise left a video message. She requested it be played in the presence of her husband, and only if Melissa reacted exactly how she predicted." He pulled a USB stick from a small velvet case and inserted it into the monitor at the center of the table. The screen lit up. There she was, Elise, frail but radiant, seated in her favorite chair by the window. Her hair was wrapped in a silk scarf. Her eyes, though tired, were sharp and warm. She smiled at the camera. "If you're watching this, I assume Melissa has already made a scene." Pause. "And if Travis is still there, then I hope he listens, maybe for the first time." She looked straight into the lens. "Melissa, my dear, I saw through you the moment you pretended to care more about my jewelry than my health. I heard your laughter when you thought I couldn't. I watched you treat my illness like an inconvenience and my death like a promotion." Her voice never raised, never cracked, only deepened. "So I made a choice. I gave what I built, with my husband, to someone who didn't want anything from me but dignity. Grace showed me love in silence. You showed me your character in noise." She looked toward the side of the camera. "Henry, don't feel guilty. This was my idea. My decision. And if Melissa cries now, let her. She mourns the money, not me." She smiled again, softer. "I'm proud of you. And when this is over, plant my favorite flowers outside. Let them bloom in silence." The screen went black. Henry stood up. No words. He left the room with slow, certain steps. Outside, the sun was breaking through the clouds. Inside, all that remained was silence. And truth. The next morning, the phone rang just after 8 a.m. Henry was already awake, sitting at the small breakfast table where he and Elise used to drink tea together every morning. Her seat across from him was empty, but he still poured 2 cups, one out of memory, the other out of respect. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Mr. Rose." A calm, familiar voice said. "It's Grace." "Grace," he said gently. "Thank you for everything yesterday." There was a pause. "I didn't know she had named me in the will," Grace said. "I never asked for anything, and I never expected it." "I know," Henry replied. "That's why she chose you." They met that afternoon at a quiet cafe Elise used to love. Grace sat nervously, still in her nursing uniform, her hair tied back in a simple braid. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't loud. She was the complete opposite of Melissa. "I feel like everyone's going to think I stole from your family," she said softly, stirring her tea without drinking it. Henry shook his head. "Elise didn't give you anything you didn't earn." Grace looked away. "I only ever wanted her to feel respected. She told me stories about your life together. About the house, the garden, the way she used to surprise you with blueberry pie even when she burned it." Henry smiled faintly. "She burned a lot of pies." "She loved you so much," Grace said, her voice suddenly full of emotion. "And she was scared. Not of dying, but of dying and leaving things in the wrong hands." Henry nodded slowly. "She made that clear." Grace pulled something from her purse, a small audio recorder. "She asked me to hold onto this. She said, if anything goes wrong or they try to fight it, play them this." "I haven't listened to it." "It's yours." That night, Henry sat alone in the study. He pressed play. Elisa's voice came through, soft but direct. "Henry, if they're trying to fight the will or spin the story, let them hear this. Melissa once whispered to me when she thought I was asleep, that your death would be the jackpot. That's when I made up my mind." She paused. "People like her. They wear charm like perfume. But underneath, it always stinks eventually." The recording ended. Henry sat still for a long while, the recorder resting in his palm like a final word. Melissa had pretended to grieve, but the only thing she truly mourned was losing. And Elise, wise as ever, had made sure she would. It had been 3 days since the will was read. 3 days since Melissa stormed out of the lawyer's office, leaving behind only a trail of disbelief and humiliation. But if anyone thought that was the end of her, they didn't know Melissa Nolan. She was back. And she was furious. At 9 a.m. sharp, Melissa barged into Travis's office, a clean, sterile space in the city's urban district, where he managed mid-level investments for upper-middle-class clients. She slammed the door behind her and dropped a thick folder on his desk. "Sit down," she hissed. Travis looked up, startled. "Mel, I have a meeting. We're suing your father. And the nurse. And the lawyer. Everyone." Travis sighed and leaned back in his chair. "You're serious?" Melissa's eyes were wide and electric with rage. "She humiliated us, Travis. In front of your father. In front of everyone. That old woman made a joke of us, even from the grave." Travis looked at her quietly. "She made her decision. You mocked her at her own funeral." "Oh, grow a spine," Melissa snapped. "You think this is about her now? This is about what's ours. What we were supposed to get. You think I married into this family to be cut out of everything by a nurse?" She paced the room, heels clicking like gunshots. "We file for undue influence. We claim Elise was manipulated. That she wasn't of sound mind. You know she was on medication. That video will. It's all emotion, no legality. We spin it. We can win this." Travis remained still. Then finally, "And what if we lose?" Melissa stopped pacing. "Then at least we burn it all down with them." By noon, Melissa had called 2 lawyers, posted a cryptic message on Facebook, "When the dead can't speak, the greedy step in," and started digging into Grace Dalton's past, searching for anything to discredit her. She didn't care if it was true. She cared if it sounded true. That same evening, a call came to Henry's house. It was Caldwell. "They filed a preliminary challenge," he said, "claiming undue influence. They're saying Grace manipulated Elise while she was ill. That you were complicit." Henry didn't flinch. "Of course they are. We're prepared," Caldwell said. "Grace's caregiving records, Elise's journal entries, signed assessments from her physician, it's all in our favor. But this will get loud." Henry looked out the window, toward Elise's garden. "Let them scream," he said calmly. She always said, "The louder they shout, the more guilty they are." The next day, Melissa held a private gathering with 2 local bloggers and 1 desperate freelance journalist. They sat at a trendy cafe while she painted herself as the real victim. "She changed the will just before she died," Melissa whispered, dramatically. "She was confused. Weak. That nurse got into her head." The journalist scribbled notes quickly. "And what about the husband? Henry?" Melissa sipped her latte slowly, then lowered her voice. "Let's just say, he was always more loyal to that nurse than to his own family." The article went live that night. Headline: "Dying widow cut out family for caretaker, greed or manipulation?" It made the front page of the local section and spread fast across social media. Grace's name was in the comments. Accusations. Ugly speculation. People she didn't know questioned her character, her intentions, her morality. Henry read the article once. Then printed it out. Folded it carefully. And placed it in the same envelope where he kept Elise's final letter. That evening, he called Grace. "I'm sorry," she said before he could even speak. "I never wanted this. I didn't ask for any of it." "I know," he said. "But you were chosen for a reason. And Elise trusted you more than anyone in her final days." "I don't want to fight." "She knew you wouldn't," Henry replied. "That's why she asked me to." Melissa had just started a war. But what she didn't realize was that the man she dismissed as weak and quiet was now the one who had nothing left to lose. And a voice still backed by the memory of a woman who saw everything and planned for even more. The next morning, Henry stood at his late wife's writing desk. The same place Elise had spent hours journaling, reading, writing letters no one else ever saw. The drawer still smelled faintly of her lavender hand cream. He opened the top compartment. Inside, a stack of leather-bound journals. One by one, he pulled them out, flipped gently through the pages. Her handwriting, elegant, even in her final months, filled every line. Dates, memories, observations, and, most important now, witness truth. He paused at an entry marked, June 2nd, 4 months before I died. Melissa stood in the doorway again today, asking if I'd updated the will. She tried to hide it as concern, but her tone was impatient, sharp. I told her I hadn't changed anything. That night, she brought me soup. It was cold. She didn't stay to talk. I knew, then, what she was waiting for. Not for my healing, for my departure. Further down. Grace is the only one who reads to me now. The only one who brushes my hair. She never asks what she'll get. Melissa asks what she'll lose. That's the difference. Henry carefully flagged that page with a ribbon. Later that day, he met with Mr. Caldwell and a new contact, Dylan Shaw, a respected local journalist known for investigative work and a no-nonsense attitude. Dylan raised an eyebrow when Henry handed him the journals. Are you sure you want this public? Henry looked him dead in the eye. She wanted the truth to outlive her. This is the way. 3 days later, the article dropped. The widow's words, private journals reveal why she cut her family out of her will. It included excerpts from Elise's journals, legally released with permission from Henry, and confirmed as authentic by Caldwell. The article was explosive. Screenshots flooded social media, her reflections on Melissa, her sadness at being treated like an inconvenience, her gratitude to Grace. People rallied. The tide turned. Grace received letters of support. Flowers left at her door. Emails from former patients' families thanking her for her service. Even Melissa's own followers began turning on her, commenting, "You laughed at her funeral. Now we know why she left you with nothing. Grace gave love. You gave deadlines. She saw through you, and we do too." Melissa tried to go on the defensive. She recorded a shaky Instagram video. "I loved Elise, okay? We just had a complicated relationship. I never meant for things to go like this." But the comments were brutal. "You wore red to her funeral." She wrote it all down. In her own hand. "This isn't damage control. This is karma." Meanwhile, Travis showed up at Henry's door. Not angry. Just broken. He looked older than he had weeks ago, his tie loose, eyes bloodshot. "I didn't know," he said. "About the journals. About what she wrote." Henry didn't answer right away. Then, "You didn't care to ask." Travis swallowed. "I followed Melissa because she was louder. But now I see, the loudest one isn't always the one with the truth." Henry nodded. "Elise used to say that. I don't want the house. I don't want anything. I just want to apologize. And I want to remember her for who she really was." Henry looked at him long and hard. Then stepped aside. "Then come in. But not as a son who lost an inheritance. As a man who lost his mother." The door closed behind them. Outside, Elisa's roses had begun to bloom again. And somewhere in the wind, or in Henry's imagination, he could almost hear her voice. "Told you I had the last word." Melissa sat in her lawyer's office, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Her legal team, once confident and eager, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No more bravado. No more casual optimism. The printed journals lay on the desk in front of them, highlighted, indexed, and irrefutably damning. Melissa slapped her hand on the desk. She was sick. That nurse manipulated her. "I don't care what she wrote. That doesn't prove anything." One lawyer, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a strained voice, cleared his throat. Actually, it does. The court will take handwritten journals very seriously, especially when there's no sign of coercion and the timeline matches her medical records. Her mental faculties were intact. Another added, and the public pressure after the article, it's not helping us. We've received anonymous threats, and the judge is already familiar with the case. She's known to side heavily with testamentary freedom. Melissa's nostrils flared. Are you saying we drop it? The head lawyer folded his hands. We're saying it's time to settle. Quietly. Before this gets worse. Meanwhile, at Caldwell's office, Henry and Grace sat across from Travis, who had officially withdrawn his name from the case. I've signed the affidavit, Travis said. I'm not contesting the will. And if Melissa wants to burn her own reputation to the ground, that's her decision. I'm out. Grace looked at him, guarded, but not unkind. I know we didn't exactly start off on the right foot, Travis added, but I want to thank you for what you did for my mother. I was too blind to see it then. Grace nodded. She saw what mattered. That's why she made the choices she did. Henry, silent until now, finally spoke. Elise believed in second chances. But she didn't believe in pretending. Make sure whatever you rebuild next is real, Travis. I will, Travis replied. 2 days later, Melissa's legal team issued a formal withdrawal of all claims. The lawsuit was dead. But Melissa, she wasn't done making noise. That night, she went live on social media, again, this time from a hotel room, mascara smudged, voice trembling with poorly staged emotion. I was silenced, she said. My husband abandoned me. My mother-in-law's nurse is exploiting her memory. I just wanted what we were promised. But unlike the first time, her audience was smaller, colder. The comments were brutal. Promised? Or expected? You lost. Sit down. You mocked a dying woman and wore red to her funeral. This is your karma. She ended the video early. Melissa had built her identity on image, charm, and entitlement. Now, all three had cracked. And she had no one left to perform for. At the Rose House, things were quieter. Henry stood in the garden with Grace, planting fresh lavender near Elise's favorite bench. I think she would have liked this, Grace said softly. She would have liked that it was you doing it, Henry replied. Grace smiled. I didn't deserve what she left me. You deserved more than what Melissa offered her. Henry looked out over the garden, hands in his pockets, the wind brushing gently through the trees. She didn't plan revenge, he added. She planned truth. That's why it hit so hard. That evening, a courier delivered a sealed envelope to Henry. Inside, a short handwritten note. It was from Melissa. I don't expect forgiveness. Just wanted you to know, you were right. She saw everything. I didn't lose money. I lost something I never deserved to have. A place in her story. Henry read the letter once. Then folded it. And placed it in Elisa's journal, between the pages she'd written the day Melissa brought her cold soup and stayed silent. Spring had returned, and with it, color slowly crept back into the Rose family garden. The house felt different now, not haunted, not heavy. Quiet. At peace. Lavender stretched along the garden paths, freshly planted by Henry and Grace. Elisa's roses had started blooming again, defiant as ever after their winter sleep. Everything she touched, even in death, had the courage to return. Henry stood at the back fence, hammering in a small hand-carved wooden sign that read, Elisa's place, for what grows in love never truly dies. He'd spent 3 days shaping it in his garage, using the same tools he once used to build their first crib, their first kitchen table, and their first garden bench. Behind him, Grace knelt in the dirt, hands covered in soil, eyes peaceful. She worked without asking for praise, without expecting anything. Just like Elise used to. I never thought I'd be part of something like this, Grace said. Henry smiled. You didn't become part of it. You helped hold it together. That afternoon, Henry sat in the study, Elisa's study, flipping through her final journal one last time. Some entries still ached to read. Today, Travis didn't visit. Again. But Grace sat with me. She doesn't speak much, but she listens. In a world full of noise, that's rare. Others made him smile. Henry forgot to buy the milk again. I didn't remind him. I just watched him try to use cream cheese in his coffee. He didn't complain. He just said, "It's not the worst mistake I've made this week." I love him. But one entry he hadn't seen before stopped him cold. Dated just days before her passing. Asterisk. I know I won't be here when Henry reads this. But I want him to know, I didn't do this to punish Melissa. I did it to protect him. Because I saw how tired he was. How hurt. How quietly he tried to carry everything. I wanted him to have a place to rest that no one could take from him. A legacy not of money, but of memory. Asterisk. Henry closed the journal and rested his hand on the cover. You gave me that, he whispered. You always did. That evening, Travis returned. Alone. Not in a suit. Just jeans, a faded sweatshirt, and a bouquet of lavender wrapped in brown paper. He stood awkwardly at the porch until Grace noticed him through the window. She opened the door, surprised. I wanted to leave these here, he said. I remember she liked the scent. Said it made her feel calm. Grace took the bouquet silently. Travis looked past her, toward the garden. Melissa and we're not together anymore. Grace nodded. I assumed. She wanted more than she gave. I couldn't live in that. Not after seeing what you gave Mom. There was a long pause. Then he added, thank you. For being there when I wasn't. Grace gave him a small, tired smile. We all come around in our own time. Some later than others. Henry stepped out, wiping dirt from his hands. You staying for dinner? Travis hesitated. Yeah, he said softly. If it's not too late. Henry glanced at the lavender. It's never too late. Not for this. That night, 3 chairs sat around the dinner table. No fine dishes. No speeches. Just a homemade meal, roasted chicken, soft bread, and Elisa's recipe for blueberry pie. The crust burned a little. Just the way she used to make it. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Henry laughed. A week later, the calendar flipped to April 12th. Elisa's birthday. It was the first one without her. And though Henry hadn't said a word about it, Grace noticed the way he stood longer by the garden gate that morning, how he stirred his coffee slower, stared at the sky longer. He hadn't spoken of grief in days, but it lived in his bones. Grace placed a gentle hand on his shoulder as he sat on the porch. You doing all right? He gave her the kind of smile only people who've lost something precious can give, a smile that says, I'm here, but I'm not whole. I thought it'd be easier after everything, he said. The truth is out. The storm has passed. And yet, it still hurts. Still feels like she could walk through that door, telling me I watered the lavender too much. She'd probably be right, Grace added gently. He chuckled. She usually was. That afternoon, Henry walked into the study, intending to sit and write, but something caught his eye. A small box tucked behind the books on the lowest shelf. He knelt down, pulled it out, and instantly recognized the handwriting. Open on April 12th. Happy birthday to me. His breath caught. He sat down, slowly unwrapping the twine and lifting the lid. Inside, a letter, wrapped in Elisa's favorite silk scarf. Her scent still clung to it, lavender, lemon, and the faintest hint of vanilla. The letter was addressed simply. To the only man I ever wanted to spend a lifetime, and beyond, with. He opened it with trembling hands. Henry. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to burn the pie, complain about your snoring, or remind you where you left your glasses. They're probably still on your head. I didn't want my birthday to go unmarked, not because I need celebrating, but because I want to leave you with a gift. My gift is this. Peace. Not in the quiet, but in knowing you did right. That you stayed kind in the face of cruelty. That you didn't let them turn you bitter. You gave me love without condition. I tried to return that in how I left this world, with my eyes open, my heart full, and my voice loud enough to echo long after I was gone. Don't sit alone today. Light a candle. Plant something. Laugh, even if it hurts. You're still alive. So live. And one more thing. The blueberry pie recipe I always accidentally burned? I left the real one in your toolbox, the one you never lock because, let's face it, you forget it even has a latch. Now go. Bake it right. I love you always. Your Elise. Henry read the letter 3 times, each slower than the last. Then he walked to the garage, opened the old toolbox he hadn't touched in months, and, taped under the lid, was a weathered recipe card. Blueberry pie, the real way. With a note scribbled at the bottom. No more cream cheese in coffee either. That's not normal, Henry. That evening, the house smelled of pie. Grace lit a candle in the garden, and Travis arrived again, this time with his young daughter from a previous relationship. She'd never met Elise, but she watched with wide eyes as Henry served pie with a cracked smile and shaky hands. She would have liked this, Travis said. She would have made fun of me for finally following her recipe, Henry replied. They all laughed. And for the first time since Elise's death, the house no longer felt like it was missing something. It felt full. Not of people, but of presence. Spring turned into early summer. The house had found its rhythm again. Slower, simpler, but not empty. Henry spent his mornings tending to Elise's garden, Grace resumed part-time nursing at the local clinic, and Travis began visiting regularly, each time with his young daughter in tow. But even as life moved forward, Henry felt a pull, not back, but within. A quiet sense that something still remained unfinished. It wasn't anger. Not even grief. It was a whisper. A soft, persistent voice in his chest that said, "One more thing. Just one more." On a Sunday morning, Henry returned to the church where Elise's funeral had taken place. The pews were half full, light spilling through the stained glass in soft colors. The organ played something familiar, a hymn Elise had loved since childhood. He sat in the very same seat he had that day. Only now, the air didn't feel as heavy. After the service, he approached Reverend Alden, a kind-faced man in his 70s who'd known the Roses for decades. "She always said I should finish what I start," Henry said. Alden smiled. "You finished a lot already. Not everything." Later that week, Henry drove up to the cliffside trail just outside town, a place Elise had loved. It overlooked the valley, where the trees rolled like waves and the sky felt closer somehow. He brought with him a small wooden box, the last of Elise's ashes. She had been partially buried in the garden, as per her will, but she had once told him, "Scatter the rest somewhere high, somewhere the wind can carry me. I want to feel free." So he did. With no ceremony. No speeches. Just wind. Silence. Memory. He opened the box, tipped it gently, and let her go. The ashes swirled upward, caught in a gust, then vanished into the sky as if being lifted. Henry stood still, his eyes closed, a tear finally falling not from pain, but from peace. Back at the house that evening, Travis helped install a bench near the lavender bed. A plaque on the side read, "Elise Rose, she loved fiercely and lived fully." Travis's daughter placed a single flower on the seat before sitting next to Henry. "Was she funny?" the little girl asked. Henry smiled. "She was the funniest woman I ever met. She could make a joke in the middle of an argument and win it without yelling. She sounds nice. She was the best." Inside, Grace found a final sealed envelope tucked in a cookbook Elise had once gifted her. It was addressed simply, "To Grace, with love, not obligation." Inside was a short note. Asterisk, "You gave me back my dignity. And now, part of this house is yours. Not in name. In soul. Keep it warm. Keep it kind. And keep Henry fed." Asterisk. Grace laughed and wiped her eyes at the same time. Later that night, Henry sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, notebook open. It was the same place where Elise once wrote grocery lists, thank you notes, and sometimes poems she never let anyone read. He began to write. To my wife. I scattered you today. Not to lose you but to set you free. You were never mine to hold forever. Just to love as long as I could. You left me a house full of memories, a garden full of you, and people who now understand what love actually looks like. You got the last word. But I still have one more thing to say. Thank you. For everything. He closed the notebook, stepped outside into the warm night, and sat on the porch under the stars, Elise's favorite blanket across his lap. Somewhere in the dark, a wind picked up, brushing past the roses, soft and steady. Almost like a whisper. Almost like her. The calendar turned again. 12 months had passed since Elise's funeral. 12 months since red dresses, whispered insults, fake tears, and the will that flipped everything upside down. But today wasn't about Melissa. Today was about Elise. Henry stood at the garden gate, dressed simply but neatly. Pressed shirt, clean slacks, shoes dusted off. In one hand, he held a fresh bouquet of white roses and lavender. In the other, Elise's favorite scarf, now faded but still soft. Grace was already outside, setting up a long wooden table under the cherry tree. Travis and his daughter arrived moments later, carrying 2 baskets of homemade food, her favorite pie included, this time not burned. A few neighbors came too. The ones who had brought casseroles after Elise's death and never asked questions. People who showed up not because of inheritance, but out of love. On the table sat a framed photo of Elise, smiling wide, sunlight in her eyes, her hands deep in the soil. As everyone gathered, Henry stepped forward. I didn't want to mark this day with silence, he began. Because Elise hated silence. She filled rooms with stories, opinions, laughter, and even her silence was usually louder than most people's words. Soft chuckles. She left more than a will. More than a house. She left a blueprint for how to live honestly, even when others won't. How to choose love without sacrificing truth. He looked toward Grace. She gave her trust to someone who earned it, not demanded it. Then, to Travis. She gave her forgiveness without saying a word. And sometimes, that's the loudest kind. Finally, he looked at his granddaughter, wide-eyed, curious. And to those too young to know her, she left gardens that will keep growing. Just like she did. Just like we will. After the words, they planted a new rose bush near the bench. Elise's bench. Travis dug the hole. Grace placed the roots. Henry poured the water. And the little girl gently patted the soil with her tiny hands. When they were done, Henry handed her the scarf. She used to wear this when the wind was just a little too cold, he said. The girl smiled and tied it gently around the base of the bush. She's not cold anymore, she said simply. That evening, after everyone had gone, Henry remained on the porch, staring out across the yard. The new rose bush leaned gently in the breeze, as if bowing. He heard the creak of the screen door. Grace stepped out with 2 cups of tea. She sat beside him in silence for a moment, then asked, "Do you miss her more today?" "I miss her differently," he replied. "Not with pain, but with gratitude, and a little jealousy." Grace raised an eyebrow. "She got to go first. She left the hard part to me." They both laughed quietly. Henry sipped his tea and added, "But she also left the map. I'm just walking it." Later, as the stars came out, Henry opened Elise's last journal one more time. He turned to the final page, which he hadn't noticed before. A single line written in her flowing hand. "If you're reading this on the day you honored me, then I was right. You're the kind of man who never lets love die quietly." And with that, he closed the book, leaned back in his chair, and let the night hold him. He was not alone. Not ever again. It had been a calm 2 months since Elise's remembrance gathering. The garden bloomed in full, birds nested again under the roof's edge, and life found its own rhythm in quiet, beautiful ways. Then, one Friday morning, as Henry was folding laundry in the living room, the doorbell rang. He wiped his hands and opened the door, expecting Grace or maybe the mailman. But it wasn't either. It was Melissa. She stood there with her hair tied back, no makeup, a simple black blouse and jeans. No red dress, no forced smile, no camera. Just her. "May I come in?" she asked, voice quiet. Almost unrecognizable. Henry looked at her for a long moment. He didn't speak. Then he stepped aside. She walked in slowly, glancing around as if expecting the walls to talk. "I'm not here to make excuses," she said. "And I'm not asking for anything." Henry nodded but still said nothing. Melissa looked toward the back door, where she could see the edge of the garden Elise loved. "I came because I've been thinking about her. About what she saw in me. Or rather, what she didn't." A pause. "I read the article. The journals. The birthday letter. I read everything I could get my hands on." Her eyes welled up, but she held the tears back. "I wanted to hate her. For cutting us out. For embarrassing me. But the more I read, the more I realized she didn't do it to hurt me. She did it to protect you." Henry finally spoke. "She knew you never loved her." Melissa's face fell. "I didn't know how. I saw her as an obstacle. Something between me and what I thought I deserved." "And what do you think you deserve now?" Henry asked. She looked up. "Nothing. That's why I came. I wanted to say thank you. For not fighting me with hate. For letting the truth speak instead." Henry leaned on the kitchen counter, crossing his arms. "Truth doesn't shout, Melissa. It just waits." Melissa pulled something from her bag, a small velvet box. "Elise gave this to me at my bridal shower. I told her I loved it, and I meant it then. But I haven't worn it in years." She opened it. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a tiny lavender charm, Elise's favorite flower. "I think she meant for me to remember her with it. But I don't deserve to." "You do." She placed it on the table, stepped back, and took a breath like someone shedding 1,000 pounds of pride. "I'll leave now," she said. "You won't hear from me again." As she reached for the door, Henry said, "Melissa." She turned. He didn't smile. But his voice softened. "You were wrong about Elise. But you were even more wrong about yourself." She blinked. "You thought you had to take from others to be someone. But Elise, she never took. She gave, and she had more than any of us." Melissa looked down. Then quietly, "Thank you," and left. That evening, Henry placed the necklace in Elise's old jewelry box, beside the wedding ring she stopped wearing when her hands became too thin. Then he went to the garden. Travis and his daughter were already there, playing near the bench. Grace was clipping herbs for dinner. And Henry, for the first time, felt that the last door had closed. But none had locked. Weeks passed. Melissa hadn't returned, and true to her word, she hadn't called, written, or even appeared online. No cryptic posts. No public explanations. Just silence. The kind that comes from someone finally facing the wreckage of who they were. But Henry didn't think of her often. Not out of spite, simply because he didn't have to anymore. His world had shifted. Not because Elise left him, but because she had prepared him to stay behind. One Sunday afternoon, Henry wandered into the attic, a space he'd avoided for months. Dust floated in the golden shafts of sunlight from the roof window. Boxes of memories sat untouched, baby clothes, photo albums, old decorations. He opened one labeled E+H, Early Years. Inside were Polaroids from the 1970s, Elise on a bicycle, Elise at a protest, Elise covered in flour laughing next to a lopsided cake. There was one he hadn't seen in years. Elise, pregnant with Travis, standing in their first home, holding Henry's face with both hands and looking at him like he was the only man alive. On the back. Asterisk, You built more than walls, H. You built us. Henry sat down on the attic floor and let the silence fill the space, not as grief, but as presence. She was gone. But so much remained. Later that day, Travis invited Henry and Grace to his daughter's school recital. Nothing fancy, a small local auditorium, kids with nervous smiles and proud parents with phones raised too high. But when the little girl stepped forward, Henry felt his throat tighten. She wore Elisa's old scarf, the faded one with lavender embroidery, tied into a bow in her hair. She looked out into the crowd and smiled directly at Henry. And suddenly, everything Elise had tried to teach, lived again. After the recital, Travis approached his father outside the building. She insisted on wearing it, he said. Said it made her feel like someone was watching over her. Henry nodded, eyes still on the sky. She's not wrong. They stood together in silence for a moment. Then Travis asked something unexpected. Would it be okay if I brought her by more often? I want her to know where she came from. I want her to know Elise. Henry turned to him slowly. You want her to know Elise? Travis nodded. Then teach her what Elise showed, not just what she said. Teach her grace. Teach her honesty. Teach her how to lose with dignity and win without pride. I'll try, Travis said. That's all Elise ever asked of any of us. That evening, back at the house, Grace handed Henry a freshly bound notebook. What's this? He asked. I gathered Elisa's journals. Made copies. Cleaned up the handwriting a bit where it faded. Thought you might want them. To give to her granddaughter one day. Henry ran his fingers along the leather cover. It was embossed with one word. Legacy. That night, he placed it beside his bed. Right next to his reading glasses and her scarf. And when he closed his eyes, he didn't see red dresses or cruel smiles. He saw lavender. And love. And a life that had endured. The air was crisp that morning, touched with the first hints of autumn. Henry stepped out into the garden, a mug of black coffee in one hand, Elisa's journal in the other. The roses had begun to close for the season, curling in on themselves like the final pages of a book. But one bush, planted last spring by Grace and Travis, stood tall. It was the rose tree. A grafted hybrid Elise had ordered months before her passing but never lived to see bloom. Grace had found the order confirmation in Elisa's emails and arranged to have it planted in her honor. And now, tall, full, rich with layered blossoms, it had finally flowered. Deep pink. Edges fading into soft cream. Fragrant and stubbornly alive. Henry knelt beside it, gently brushing a petal with his fingertips. She would have said it bloomed late because I forgot to water it, he murmured. Behind him, Grace appeared with a spade in hand. We're adding a plaque today, she said, lifting a brass rectangle from her apron pocket. Henry read it aloud. For Elise, who planted strength, grew truth, and pruned away everything false. He nodded. She'd have liked that. Actually, Grace said with a small smile. She wrote it. Found the words scribbled on the back of a recipe card. Henry laughed. Of course she did. They set the plaque into the soil, polished the top, and stood back in silence. Minutes passed. Then Henry spoke again. You know, I used to think this house would die with her. Grace looked at him gently. And now? He glanced around, at the blooming garden, at the open kitchen windows, at Travis and his daughter laughing in the distance, playing with the garden hose. Now I realize it didn't die with her, he said. It just grew into something else. That evening, Travis brought over a box. Found this in storage, he said. Didn't think much of it until I opened it. Henry took it inside and set it on the kitchen table. Inside, old cassette tapes, labeled in Elisa's handwriting. 1991, Garden Notes. 1997, Henry snoring. 2003, Travis graduation. But one tape, unlabeled, had a post-it stuck to it. Save this for when the garden blooms again. Henry retrieved the old cassette player from the closet, blew off the dust, and pressed play. Elisa's voice crackled through. Henry, I don't know when you'll hear this. Maybe years from now. Maybe never. But if you're hearing it, it means something grew. And that means everything's okay. She paused. You didn't just build a home. You built a legacy. And if this garden is blooming again, that means you kept going. That's all I ever wanted. The tape clicked off. Henry stared at the player for a long time. Then he stood and walked out to the garden one more time that night. Under the stars, he sat by the rose tree, the newly planted plaque glinting under moonlight, and whispered, "It bloomed, Elise. Just like you said." The first frost of the season settled gently on the windowsills. The once blooming garden began its quiet retreat, not death, but rest. Henry knew the difference now. Life didn't vanish. It shifted, transformed, took root in other places. And the house? It stood, not untouched by grief, but reborn through it. It was Saturday, the 1.5-year mark since Elise passed. Henry walked slowly through the home, fingertips brushing the woodwork he'd carved himself decades ago. Every hallway held her echo. Every corner, a memory. But none of it hurt anymore. Now, the memories held him, like warm hands. He entered the living room where Grace and Travis were arranging old photos into albums for the granddaughter's school project, My Family Tree. A snapshot of Elise, age 25, sun in her eyes, holding baby Travis on her hip. A photo of Henry at the stove, making pancakes badly. A photo of Grace in the garden with Elise, both laughing, dirt on their faces. And one final shot, the rose tree, full bloom, plaque visible. The girl looked up. That's my great-grandma, right? Henry smiled. That's her. That's Elise. Later that day, Henry sat down at Elisa's old desk, the same one he had once considered sealing shut forever. Now, it was where he wrote letters to the future. He opened a clean notebook, the one marked, Legacy, and began to write. To the one reading this. If this house has reached you, if this journal sits in your hands, then you are a branch of something beautiful. You come from a woman who taught us that truth matters more than pride, that silence can be louder than screaming, and that love, real love, has roots deeper than anything money can buy. This house is yours now. Not for what it's worth, but for what it holds. Guard it. Fill it. Grow it. And when someone laughs at the wrong time, wears red to a funeral, or chases what they never earned, let them go. Because this place, this family, it remembers what matters. He signed it simply. Henry Rose. Weeks later, Henry passed peacefully in his sleep, the journal beside him on the nightstand, Elisa's scarf tucked into his hand. He wasn't afraid. Because he had done what few do. He left nothing unsaid. The house passed on, not through courts or chaos, but by design. To Grace, to Travis, to the little girl with lavender in her hair and a heart full of questions. They kept the garden blooming. Kept the journals read. Kept the pie slightly burned, just the way Elise liked it. And the neighbors would still point and say, "That's the Rose House. The one with the garden that always comes back." Because some homes don't just hold people. They hold promises. The end. Thank you for spending this time with us. If the story moved you, even a little, let us know. Drop a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after the screen fades. Your support means more than you know.